The story of this cold-blooded killer begins over 35 years ago in the picturesque city of St Albans in Hertfordshire. Joanna Dennehy was born in 1982 and began life in a loving and secure family home. Very few could have predicted this bright and intelligent young girl would turn into a sadistic monster with a taste for violence.
By all accounts, she was starting off in life with what we might say is a perfect foundational upbringing.
Joanna Dennehy appears to come from quite a normal family. She had a relatively uneventful childhood. She's one of two siblings. Her mother worked in a supermarket, her father worked as a security guard and for a telecommunications company. And from the outside, they appear to be a normal family.
She had a sister to which she was very close. They had even developed a secret language. She played netball for the school. She was a very normal, quite bright schoolgirl.
But Dennehy's idyllic childhood was curtailed as she entered her teens.
She started to experiment with drugs, she started not going to school, and she linked up with a man called John Tracie.
Her parents, they were at their wits' end. They didn't know what to do. They tried to keep her locked up or bring her home from school. The teachers tried to reprimand her. And the more they tried to control Jo, it was Jo saying, "Stuff you." And it was literally like throwing petrol on a fire.
Dennehy and Trina ran away together, embarking on a turbulent relationship. Despite Dennehy's violent outbursts, the couple had 2 children together and eventually settled in Cambridgeshire.
I think quite a lot is made of the fact that Joanna Dennehy misused alcohol and drugs, but I think she's well aware of the fact that this is going to be discussed, and she knows that these offer quite a convenient excuse for her behaviour. And alcohol and drugs and other substances can disinhibit, but that's assuming that people have got those moral standards to begin with, and Joanna Dennehy didn't have them in the first place.
A very disturbed woman. She had done a lot of self-harm, of cutting herself and so on. So there were a number of danger signs that this was somebody who was not attuned to society.
As time went on, Dennehy's erratic behaviour intensified. She'd cheat on Trina and leave him and their 2 children for sporadic periods of time. Her drinking worsened and she reportedly began to carry a knife hidden in her boot.
I think she's somebody who perhaps has always enjoyed hurting other people. It's almost like she's this crazy scientist and the world is her experiment.
Finally, in 2009, Trina took the children and fled from Dennehy, afraid of what she might do next.
The company that she was keeping as well, she was surrounded by people who were similarly disconnected. So I think when there was no check or filter or break on her behaviour, she was only going to get worse.
Dennehy had become no stranger to the local police. She'd been in and out of prison for drug offences and was also given a 12-month community order for being in control of a dangerous dog. In February 2012, Dennehy spent 3 days on the psychiatric unit at Peterborough City Hospital, where she was diagnosed with a series of disorders.
She has had various diagnoses attached to her: antisocial personality disorder, psychopathic personality disorder. And these are conditions, they're not mental illnesses. And there's a real important difference between the two, because people with personality disorders know the difference between right and wrong. They're fully rational, they're in control of what they're doing, but they choose to do it anyway. So she's not somebody who feels bad, who feels remorseful, who regrets things. She does what she wants to do, and she doesn't care about the consequences.
By 2013, 31-year-old Dennehy had settled in a small bedsit in Byfield, a housing estate in Peterborough. But the local residents were unaware of her troubled past or her violent nature. One of Dennehy's new neighbours was Michelle Bowles.
She was polite to me. But I wouldn't melt on her mouth, basically. She was well-spoken to me and never swore. She was actually quite pleasant, do you get what I mean? I showed her respect. She loved babies. She was excellent with children. I didn't have a problem with her. When I saw her or spoke to her, I said hello, she said hello back.
But other residents were not so sure. Michelle's friend John Chapman lived in the same building as Dennehy. He was a Falklands War veteran who'd fallen on hard times.
I don't know what regiment he used to be in. I should know, because the man of stories used to say, it's just John being smiley all the time and happy and nice to know.
But John Chapman didn't smile when Joanna Dennehy was around.
John was petrified. John came in mine and he said, on several occasions, there's this mad woman moved in. She says she's going to get rid of me, whatever way she can.
And he was right to be afraid. In just a few months, Joanna Dennehy's threats would turn to violence, and John Chapman would be dead. Tracy Andrews was born on the 9th of April 1969 in the West Midlands.
Well, Tracy was brought up just outside Birmingham in Redditch and Alvechurch, and she was the middle child. She had an older sibling and a younger sibling and several half-siblings. And her parents broke up when she was around about 6 years old because they'd had quite a volatile relationship.
The separation of her parents in 1975 had a lasting effect on young Tracy.
Well, Tracy's parents split up and her mother got married to another man. And when we look at our parents' relationships, they are quite important because they inform our expectations of other people, our expectations of the relationships that we go on to have.
Kids need attention, you know, they need to be loved and cuddled and everything. And a lot of kids that come from those kind of broken homes, and the case of Tracy, they want to be loved by mother, father, or somebody. So that is definitely, in my opinion, one of the things that pushed her into always wanting the attention of other men.
Tracy left school in 1986, and aged 21, she had a baby daughter. But the relationship with her partner lasted barely a year, and they soon went their separate ways.
What we've got here is a woman who doesn't like her partners having a life that doesn't involve her. She doesn't like her partners going out without her. She gets very jealous, she's very possessive.
She certainly had a temper. Everybody who knew her said she had a temper, and when she lost her temper, everybody knew about it. She would shout at the top of her voice. The whole street would hear.
By 1994, 25-year-old Tracy was living in a council flat in Alvechurch and working as a barmaid. But her aspirations went far beyond pulling pints.
She had visions, she had dreams of becoming a model, but and you know, she was very photogenic. She looked good on camera, and she knew it, and she had some pictures taken and a photo album put together, but that never really took off either.
She became a barmaid, working in a pub, but she still dressed very provocatively, and she still loved talking to men and chatting to men. Again, seeking the attention that she wanted to get as a model, because obviously when you're that pretty and you're a model, you do get a lot of attention.
Living nearby to Tracy was 23-year-old Lee Harvey. He also had a daughter from a previous relationship.
Lee Harvey was a young man from a very close family, and he worked as a bus driver for the West Midlands Travel. So this was a job that involved meeting many people on a daily basis. He was very outgoing. He was interested in cars and was always very well turned out. So he was your typical young Birmingham lad, essentially, very close to his mum, very close to his sister.
The paths of the two young single parents would soon cross.
Well, Lee and Tracy met in October 1994 in Ritzy's nightclub in Birmingham, and this relationship really did develop at a lightning pace. They had moved in with one another only around 3 months into the relationship, so this was going very, very fast. And their relationship was quite a volatile one. They were both quite possessive, quite jealous when it came to the other's relationships with the opposite sex. And you often find this in relationships that develop very quickly. You haven't got that foundation of trust that's been built. You're always a little bit kind of suspicious as to what the other person's up to because you don't really know them.
And they would row, and they would fight like cat and dog. And neighbours would report how voices would be raised at all hours of the day and night and would go on and on for hours and then stop and then start again.
The couple got engaged after just 6 months, but their volatile relationship would often see them break up, only to get back together again soon after.
It was maybe almost a carbon copy of what Tracy grew up with in her house. She had a very explosive temper, and Lee Harvey also, in a way, wouldn't like just bow down to her screaming, so he would scream back.
She was forever throwing him out into the street, and she would throw his clothes out of the window or in a black bin bag and chuck him out the front door, change the locks. And then they would have reconciliations. Lee would go back, more violence, Lee would leave, Lee would go back, more violence. This went on for a period of about 2 years.
Their explosive relationship finally came to a head on December the 1st, 1996.
So they'd been rowing all day. Lee tended to be the peacemaker, and it was probably Lee's suggestion, why don't we go for a drink? Why don't we just get a change of scene, a breath of fresh air? Let's get out of here. Let's just go and relax and have a drink. And that's what they did.
But Lee Harvey would never make it home again. By 11 p.m. he would be dead. The only witness to the fatal altercation was his fiancée Tracy Andrews, and her version of events would soon make it one of the most talked about murders of the decade. She was born Dorothea Gray in San Bernardino County, California on January the 9th, 1929.
She was one of several children. She lost both of her parents quite early on. She spent time in an orphanage. She was kind of passed from pillar to post quite a lot. So she didn't form those stable, secure attachments with her caregivers that many of us do. And I think that went on to shape the person that she became.
Dorothea, lived a very difficult early childhood. She was deprived in substantial ways. She didn't have loving parents. She had to scavenge for food.
By the mid-1960s, Dorothea had been married 3 times and taken on the name of her third husband, Puente. She had already served time in prison for forging checks and had found a new way to earn money.
She starts to get involved in sex work, selling her body to basically put clothes on her back and feed herself. So she is living this quite kind of feral existence. Now, here's an individual for whom violence and abuse was just normal for her. If we look back at her childhood experiences, they're certainly not normal and warm and loving. They are quite brutal and quite cold. So this is the only thing that she knows. It's those basic emotions and those basic instincts.
And then, after becoming a prostitute, she discovered this occupation of being a caregiver, which requires minimal qualifications. And all of a sudden, a world was opened up to her.
In 1981, Puente began renting an apartment at 1426 F Street in downtown Sacramento. She took on the role of caretaker for the other tenants in the Victorian boarding house. Soon after, Puente met 61-year-old Ruth Monroe. Ruth's son, Bill Clausen, remembers his mother fondly.
She was great. I mean, she was my mom. I'm going to say she's great. But she was. She brought up 5 kids after my father passed away, and I thought she did a good job. We met Dorothea through a gentleman that my mom met while she was working, and he kept asking her out, and she finally went out with him, and then they started seeing each other, and he introduced her to Dorothea. During their friendship, Dorothea decided she wanted to open a restaurant, and my mom wasn't working anymore, and my mom had a little bit of money, so she ended up opening the little cafe at the Round Corner Bar.
Ruth ended up marrying Harold, the man who'd introduced her to Puente. But soon he was diagnosed with cancer, and living full-time in a hospital. Ruth didn't want to live alone, and Puente had an idea. She could live with her at 1426 F Street. It turned out to be a fatal decision.
We moved her in there on Easter Sunday, 1982, and she died April 26th, 2 weeks later. I saw my mom every day from the time I moved her in there. I stopped by there on my way home from work. And the last 3 days of her life, she seemed like she was getting sick. And when I went there, I'd noticed that she had a drink in her hand, and my mom didn't drink. So I asked her, I said, "What's that?" And she said, it was a drink that Dorothea fixed to calm her nerves. I said, fine, I didn't think anything of it because I knew they were friends, and okay, fine.
But Ruth deteriorated so badly over the next few days that the next time Bill went to visit her, she was almost catatonic.
Mom was laying there. I sat next to her and touched her and told her, I said, "Dorothea's taking care of you, you'll be fine." And she had a tear coming out of her eye, and that was it. She didn't say anything. She just laid there. The next morning, I got a call from my brother telling me that mom was dead. Went over there. She had already been taken away by the coroner's wagon, and Dorothea had said that she committed suicide.